Hi, everybody. Welcome to another edition of Packers Unscripted from Packers.com. I am Mike Spofford, joined, as always, by my partner in crime, Weston Hodkiewicz. We're coming to you here from our studios at Lambeau Field, reviewing Week 3 of OTAs, Wes. We got another chance to see a practice earlier this week. Minicamp is next week. That will be the final week of the off-season program. But I'm just going to throw this at you. Based on what we saw on Tuesday, this kicking competition is getting a little wild. That was not something that I think I've seen as far as the volume of opportunities and three guys going at it and just the craziness at the end of practice with this kicking competition on Tuesday.
Well, Matt LaFleur said this is the second time they've done this in terms of the three guys all getting opportunities in the same practice. That, in my time, I think maybe they did it once after they signed Zach Ramirez to come in with Giorgio Tavecchio at the end of the 13 camp. I think they might have, with Mason Crosby, I think they might have all done that one day, but then they cut Giorgio the next day or something like that.
Yeah.
I've never witnessed anything like this. First off, kudos goes to Rich Bisaccia and Byron Storr in the special. They made it work. Like, it was a pretty seamless transition in terms of all the guys that got ops.
And it was clearly competitive, too.
Very competitive.
You could sense it. Yeah.
Yeah, and at the end of the practice, then what happened is they did the 2-minute drill, and actually I think even if the offense didn't get down the field, they still set it up for the field goals. They end with I want to say it was 57-yarders.
Yeah, they were kicking long ones. They were definitely 55 plus.
And they all made it. So what they do, they come and they rev it up a little bit more, and as Greg Joseph said, he hasn't seen anything like this since his days back in college, where they had the entire football team lined up around the offensive line, the snapper, and obviously the kicker, and each guy had a shot at from 51 yards. Jack Pezledzny missed the opportunity. Joseph also missed it. Final opportunity was Anders Carlson. He puts it right through the uprights and was completely mobbed by the entire football team. It was, for as off-season practices go, that was as much of a training camp type feel as I think I've experienced.
Yeah, and the guys were having maybe it wasn't so fun for the kickers.
No, for sure.
The rest of the guys were having a lot of fun with it, because when they were creating this big distracting thing, you know, getting up right up close to the holder and the kicker and the snapper, and you know they're kind of squirting their they were squirting water bottles, but not just on the kicker, but on Daniel Whelan, the holder, and on, you know, whoever
Poor Daniel. He's just doing his job, man.
Yeah, exactly. Well, and on the snappers as well. They were trying to distract those guys too. Obviously not a realistic situation, but something where you're just you're trying to create a circumstance where concentration is at a premium, right? That's what they're after there. And it wasn't just that, but it was, as you said, it was a 50-plus yard field goal. Yeah. So it wasn't just some kind of a chip shot. It was fun to watch. I'm curious to see, you know, how this kicking competition plays out through the summer and through the preseason games, training camp and everything. This has all the makings of something that goes right down to, as I sort of joked, right down to checking in for the Brazil flight that might be right up until that point that the Packers make their decision on who their kicker is going to be for 2024.
Well, we'll see how long they keep the triad going there. But I do think there's a benefit to having kickers in there the entire camp. You know, I think back to some of these other years in which they kind of created competition, but in some ways they didn't, because you'd get to the end of the offseason program and then they'd cut a Ryan Winslow, or you'd get a week into camp and they'd already figure out who their punter was. Let's be honest about one thing, Mike. Not to say that you can't have somebody come in on August 8th and make a roster spot. We've seen it happen before.
It's happened before.
But generally speaking, your team is mostly set. I don't know what kind of benefit there is to shuffling out a specialist, to bringing in somebody else at that juncture, assuming there's not an issue, a persistent issue in practice with the guys that you have. So I feel like, you know, pressure makes diamonds. And the one thing I hope people can take a step back on in relation to Carlson just specifically, please understand that, yes, there were too many missed extra points last year. last year, the postseason, we saw what happened. It is not easy to be a rookie kicker in the National Football League.
No.
And the one difficult thing with drafting a kicker is you are immediately put into the predicament of having to decide how much latitude you give that individual. Because, as I've said umpteen times already, you don't want to find yourself in a situation like the Vikings did, where they give up too early on Daniel Carlson. The guy goes on to become an all-pro. It looks like he's probably just going to end up being the Raiders kicker for the next 10 years.
Yeah.
When you have a guy that you felt strongly about developmentally, you want to give him the opportunity to compete for that job and give him an honest opportunity at that. They brought in Greg Joseph. That's legitimate competition for him. Two guys that both kicked in the NFC North last year. May the best man win.
Yeah, and I think I totally agree with what you said about Carlson, and obviously there's the lesson the Vikings learned with regard to his older brother and all of that. The interesting spot that the Packers are in here is because of the run they made at the end of the season. You were playing as well as anybody. You're, an eyelash away from making it to the NFC Championship game, and a missed field goal late in the fourth quarter was a big part of that. The Packers are going to have an interesting decision to make because I think they 100% want to develop Anders Carlson, and they want to see him be the kicker here for the next 10 or 12 years and be the next Mason Crosby for this organization. I think that's the goal and that's the desire. But you can only have so much patience when you're a contender. Mm-hmm. And when you're playing, you believe you're a contender for a Super Bowl and you're playing for it. That's why Greg Joseph was brought in. This is a guy, he doesn't have a huge pedigree in the NFL, but he's kicked in a conference championship game with the Tennessee Titans earlier in his career. He's been the guy for the Minnesota Vikings for the last 3 years. Some interesting statistical quirks when you look at his career. I was putting together a story that's actually going to appear on our website on Friday. In Greg Joseph's career, he's only missed one field goal inside of 40 yards in his career, but he's missed like 16 extra points, which of course are 33 yards. Now, maybe a couple of those might have been after penalties and might have been longer. I didn't do all the research, but it's just kind of strange, because he's been really, really solid on anything inside 40 yards, and he's been pretty darn good from 40 plus as well. But then you look at the number of extra points he's missed, and you kind of scratch your head a little bit. So I agree with you. It's absolutely, may the best man win. From what we have seen, and again, it's only been 1 day a week in OTAs. From what we have seen, I haven't seen anything from Anders Carlson that tells me the Packers are just ready to move on. I haven't seen anything that tells me that, but we have an entire training camp, multiple preseason games and everything to go through to sort this thing out. And nobody's making any decisions right now because nobody has to.
Yeah, and this is when you want to make those decisions, honestly. I know there was some talk at the end of last season, like, okay, well, you're going into the playoffs. If you're looking for a kicker in December, you're in a bad spot, because it's going to be very rare you're going to find somebody that's out on the market, especially in the day and age where there's practice squads available, where you're just going to be able to put that guy in and count on him.
Brian Gutekunst said after the season they were looking. I mean, with the struggles that Carlson was having, the Packers were making this run at a playoff spot. They were looking, and they felt personnel-wise there wasn't a better option out there, or they would have brought somebody else in. He said that after the season. I have to take him at his word.
And I think the Packers did the best possible thing in that, it's going to be very difficult to go out and sign a guy like Matthew Gay a year earlier, where it's going to be, this is the top of the line, you're going to have to pay him free agent, while also still having Anders there to compete for that job.
Yeah.
Greg Joseph was a good middle ground because he was allowed to walk as an unrestricted free agent from Minnesota, but he's been around for a long time. As he told you in the locker room on Tuesday, he's competed for jobs before. He learned a lot from that experience. That's what kind of forged his mentality.
Yeah. He's won jobs and he's lost jobs.
Yeah.
This is a guy who's been through this kicking competition thing before.
When you talked about the weird quirk with the field goals, the other thing, I remember doing the 5 things on him. I was actually in Florida at the time when they signed him. And he's had a really interesting career because he talked about the challenges of kicking in Cleveland and obviously being there 1 year. He had a very unique thing where he went to Tennessee at the end of, I believe, was the 2019 season?
Yes, it was the tail end of the 2019 season because Ryan Suckup got hurt. Suckup got hurt for the Titans, and they needed a kicker, and they brought him in, and he ended up being the guy that carried them through, that held the position through the AFC Championship game.
And he only kicked extra points. It was
until the playoffs.
Until the playoffs. But I think he had 15 extra points or something like that during the regular season.
He didn't, for all the games toward the end of the season, he didn't actually get a field goal attempt until the postseason because all of his regular season stats were just PATs.
Find me a guy that just hasn't even attempted one in 5 straight games, let alone make them.
Yeah.
But I feel like this is a great setup for them. Podlesny, I'm very interested to see what the approach is, what Green Bay takes with him. He was a guy they signed back in January. That was the first sign of a competition there. They decided to keep him around even after signing Joseph. So it's going to be very interesting how it works out. But I feel like, to get back to my core argument here, however many it is, the multiples, the plural, keeping those guys around, having a competition, 2 or 3, getting into training camp, I think is going to be beneficial for both Carlson and the other kickers.
Yeah, we'll just have to see how it plays out. I don't want to forget about the sponsor business today, Wes, so I'm going to do it right now. Sirius XM NFL Radio delivers hard-hitting analysis and up-to-the-minute NFL news that true football fanatics need 24/7, 365. And at Cousin Subs, we have something for everyone, like our Wisconsin cheese curds, mac and cheese, golden fries, and creamy shakes, all paired with your favorite sub or sub in a bowl. Cousin Subs, 50-plus years of better. All right, well, we know when we're standing there watching practice, we anticipate, we're waiting for the 11-on-11 to start. Those are the plays we like to watch when they're going full speed.
When they're going full speed.
When they're going full speed, yes. We've seen in OTAs, we've seen a lot of 11-on-11 at half speed, which is not something from a reporter standpoint that does a whole lot for us visually. But you never know what you're going to see with this Packers offense, as we've talked about, with all these different receivers that are available and where the ball is going to go. And lo and behold, right at the beginning of 11-on-11 on Tuesday, Jordan Love lets one rip deep. And who's the guy running underneath it? Not Jaden Reed, not Christian Watson, not Romeo Doubs, not Dontavian Wicks, but Bo Melton. 75-yard touchdown to kick off the 11-on-11. And quite frankly, I think it caught the defense's attention because we saw the defense, ratchet up their play the rest of the 11-on-11 of practice after that. But man, I tell you, Bo Melton, he's still going to be in a fight for a roster spot once again. But man, having a guy like that on the depth chart where he is for the Green Bay Packers says something about what the Packers have at that position.
The Melton family is one that fascinates me, and I think, assuming everything works out, Bo's on the roster again this year, I think it'll be a really interesting story to do going into his game against Max, his younger brother, who was a second-round pick of Arizona when those two teams play in Week 6. But the high character of that group, both Max and Bo, they had other offers. They both decided to go to Rutgers. Now, in Bo's case, that was definitely a big decision because Rutgers has kind of turned a corner now that Schiano's coming back there. They're a little bit more competitive than they were when Chris Ash was there. And there were some lean years where Bo was the guy and there wasn't a whole lot of winning always happening. Now, I don't know how much that affected his draft stock or not, but he goes in the 7th round. John Schneider drafts him into Seattle. He doesn't make the roster. He's there the entire season. The Green Bay Packers come calling at the end of, the end of the Aaron Rodgers era at 22. Then the Packers, for the second straight year, draft three receivers in the draft.
Yeah.
Competition aplenty, bodies aplenty, investments aplenty for the Packers. Bo doesn't make the roster. I went back and looked, Mike. Preseason last year, Bo had 1 catch for 3 yards. It's going to be hard to make the roster with that type of production in the preseason.
Yep.
But what happens? He sticks it out. He stays in Green Bay, and he was an absolute electric piece for this defense or for this offense in that final stretch of the season. As Matt LaFleur said, the first receiver to have a 100-yard game for the Packers. And after that, Dontavian Wicks, I think, came right after it. I think maybe Romeo Doubs.
Doubs had the one in the playoffs in Dallas.
The domino effect started.
Yeah.
So bringing this all back to practice on Tuesday, in so many cases, it would have been almost a surprise to see someone like Melton, who is running with the ones. This is Jordan Love throwing the ball, right? But as he was talking about afterwards, that's a play they've been trying to hit for a couple of these practices now. They wanted to get a big moment there. And as it just turns out, Xavier McKinney subbed out right before that. So the Packers have the young secondary. They have the two young safeties back there. And he runs a post route and nobody covers him.
Yeah.
And it was funny listening to him describe it because he's like, I look back and the ball isn't in the air yet. And at that moment, he knows exactly what's happening because he's the one running the deep route. Jordan Love probably threw his best pass of the day. He puts it right on his receiver. Would have been a 75-yard touchdown. Mike, this is a guy last year, 20-plus receptions. I think he was right up there with some of the best receivers in the league during the final month of the season in terms of the explosive plays. And it's moments like that show you both the character of the individual, the athleticism of the individual, and just his ability to execute. Bo Melton is not going away.
Yeah, no, he's not. He's going to be in this fight for a roster spot, for playing time, for opportunities, just as he was last year. It's really interesting the dynamic that the Packers have at wide receiver. You wrote a story on Bo Melton that is on our website the night before that story went up. I wrote about the whole question that's been discussed a lot. We've discussed it on this show, about do the Packers have a true number one wide receiver? Do they need to have somebody emerge as a true number one wide receiver? And when you look at what Green Bay has going on right now, while with an entire receiving core that is 6, 7, 8 deep, quite frankly, there are going to be guys that maybe they get a look from somebody on the waiver wire, or they're going to come back on the practice squad and maybe be the next Bo Melton who, hangs around on the practice squad and then gets a chance later on. All of that, we'll see how it plays out. The Packers have a whole bunch of these guys on their rookie contracts, while Justin Jefferson's, getting a new deal for $35 million a year, and Jaden Waddle from Miami's getting a new deal, and guys like Brandon Ayuk and others, CeeDee Lamb, are apparently holding out of mandatory minicamp with their clubs because they're looking for new contracts and new extensions and getting the big money while it's out there for the wide receivers. Packers are going to have plenty of decisions to make over the next couple years in terms of those second contracts and where to invest the money. But man, is it a nice spot to be in right now, isn't it? Yeah. With where the Packers are at wide receiver.
For 2 more years. I mean, now you can do some extensions next year if you want.
Yeah, next year, Romeo Doubs and Christian Watson become eligible for extensions because when on your rookie contract, you have to play 3 years before you can even look at that contract and do anything to change it. So those guys will get their 3rd years in after this season, and then for those draft picks from 2023, it'll be another year after that.
When you are having a nice night out at the Spofford residence, you want to take out Mrs. Spofford for a dinner. like what are you looking for? Like, what type of food are you looking for?
I'm a fish guy.
You're a fish guy. Tilapia.
Yes. Yeah, sure. A fancy preparation.
Yeah, fancy preparation.
Give it to me.
Well, here's what I love about the weight, because people keep asking this question left and right, and Rob Domofsky wrote a really nice piece on Jaden Reed, and there's reasons to look at all these guys and say that could be a number one receiver. But this is the way I look at it. I was thinking about this a couple nights ago. Yours is fish. Mine's probably a nice filet. You go, and if you go to a restaurant, and all they have is that really nice fish, or in my case, a filet, and around it they have chicken nuggets, and you have fish sticks, and maybe some Reese's or Ritz crackers with some sauce. What are you eating out of that?
Yeah.
You're gonna go get your fish. I'm gonna go get my filet. Then it's very easy to determine who the guy is.
For sure.
What the main course is. Well, in the Packers case, I mean, you got filet, you got free range chicken, you got Chilean sea bass, you got lobster, you got all these different options that when you have that, it opens up so many different avenues for Jordan Love. It opens up so many avenues for Matt LaFleur. And I think that's the beauty of it. Now, as some people have been asking in the locker room, ego's a big thing in this league. People, receivers especially, they want their touches. They want their ops, as Jason Vrabel likes to talk about. It's difficult to juggle all of that. But what's cool about this group is looking at Jaden Reed quickly, looking at Dontavian Wicks, 2 rookies that in some ways were kind of competing for snaps last year. They get done with last season, and both of them say, you know what? We want to keep this thing going. We want to keep the train on the tracks. Weeks after the 2023 season ends, they're down in Florida together training for the upcoming season. No quarterback. They're just running routes with each other. They're working out with each other, eating, Grubhub with each other, because they felt like they have a common bond there. They have a history. They have a past. You look at Bo Melton. You look at Christian Watson going down to Madison to try to get some answers. Romeo Doubs, the most consistent guy I think I've seen as a young player in Green Bay at that position. I wrote about it in Inbox earlier this week, but the culture of that room is what has allowed all these guys to become playmakers. And Mike, if there's one thing we've learned, you can look at, Christian Kirk, you can look at a lot of these guys. You don't need to have 1,000-yard season after 1,000-yard season to go get a big contract in free agency.
Yeah.
If teams look at what you do with your opportunities, they realize the type of difference maker you are, you're going to get paid. In my credit, my hat goes off to all those guys, because Romeo Doubs last year, when Christian Watson was out, would have been perceived to have been the number one receiver in so many ways. He was still rooting for Bo Melton. He was still rooting for Dontavian Wicks. The culture of that room has allowed this thing to stick together. And when you have so many weapons and so many talented guys, that's not always an easy thing to do.
Yeah, and this whole question of number one wide receiver, yes or no, who's it going to be, who does it need to be? As you said, with regard to the culture of the room, those guys don't care. That's not what they're thinking about, and that's to their credit because of what that means for the team. What I will say right now is that I think schematically, and when I say schematically, I mean how defenses game plan against you and scheme to try to stop you. Schematically, the Packers' number one wide receiver is Christian Watson. He's the one who impacts what the defense does the most.
Yep.
But production-wise, whether the Packers end up with a number one receiver is still kind of the open question. I think it could end up being Jaden Reed this year. That wouldn't surprise me at all. It also wouldn't surprise me if the Packers have a different player lead them in receptions,
100%.
a different guy in yards, and a different guy in touchdowns. Because we've even seen not that long ago that a tight end in Matt LaFleur's offense had double-digit touchdowns, talking about Bobby Tunyon, of course. So who knows what that means for Luke Musgrave, say, if he can stay healthy for an entire season. So the various statistical categories, the whole number one idea could end up being spread all across the board, right? And that's what's going to be really fun about this offense. And as Jordan Love said, moving forward now, they're out there in OTAs where he's making checks and adjustments at the line of scrimmage, and they're running some different stuff, which 12 months ago, OTAs last year, that kind of stuff wasn't happening because it was just about, with Love as QB1 for the first time, with Doubs and Watson just in their second season, and then the rookies that came in through the draft, it was all about just get the basics of the offense down. Let's get this figured out. And we saw the progression, obviously, where the offense was, especially the passing offense was early in the season versus later in the season. Well, now they're just everybody individually, whether it's Bo Melton and his strong finish or collectively as a group, they're just trying to pick up where they left off. And I think that's what makes this season so exciting offensively, with then the added twist of a change at the number one running back spot with Josh Jacobs coming in for Aaron Jones, and what that's going to mean moving forward.
The thing we also need to acknowledge here, you hope the Packers can stay healthy at those skill positions. Hopefully, fingers crossed from a personal perspective, hopefully Christian Watson, everything he did this offseason, the answers he got.
Yeah. And the interesting thing is, part of the reason we know so much about these guys and there is so much confidence in these guys to make plays is because of the injuries that happened last year and the way the opportunities got spread around, the way Bo Melton was called upon to, the way Malik Heath at times last season was called upon to step up and make some plays because of guys who were out. So yes, you hope for health, but the lack of health, so to speak, last season is partly why the Packers are in the position they're in right now.
Yeah, and that was kind of the point I was going to make. The Stockton to the Malone here that I was going to make is
sorry.
No,
I stole the pass for the slam dunk.
But we scored.
We did.
No, but that's the point I'm trying to make, though. Unfortunately, injuries in 2023 are, and this goes to tight end too, by the way. Injuries in 2023 is why we learned so much about these guys, why we saw how many people stood out.
Absolutely.
And it's not just Tucker Kraft either. The way Ben Sims played last year as an undrafted free agent, a guy that, by the way, he's huge. He's a big dude. he wasn't just seen as like the Mercedes Lewis type, okay, this is going to be a great blocking tight end. He had to learn a lot in his role. Bo Melton doesn't get the opportunities he gets last season if it wasn't for, unfortunately, the injury to Toure. You look at Dontavian Wicks. He doesn't get that opportunity if Christian Watson isn't dealing with the hamstring. That was a question I even asked Dontavian during our availability with him 2 weeks ago. I mean, did you expect, how much of this did you surprise you to be able to come out of the gates right out of the way and produce the way he did? And he said, the only thing that surprised me is how soon the opportunities came. He thought he was going to have to wait for him more. So the best scenario in all this is Matt LaFleur, Jason Vrabel, Ryan Mahaffey, all these guys, Adam Stenovich. The best scenario is that they have difficult decisions to make with how they want to build their game plans. You don't want injuries to happen, but the fortification of this offense has been built because of that. And I think that's what makes this 2024 Packers offense extremely exciting.
Yeah, absolutely. One other thing I want to touch on before we go, and I'm kind of working on this a little bit with regard to the Insider Inbox column for tomorrow morning, but I mentioned kind of where things are going with the wide receiver market and the money that is getting thrown around, right? The top cornerbacks in the NFL right now, Jair Alexander being one of them, the top guy is, $20 million, $21, $22 million a year, while these receivers are now pushing the upper 20s, and now Justin Jefferson's up to $35 million a year. There's got to be a cycle coming where the cornerbacks are going to get their money, right?
Yeah.
If you're going to be paying these receivers all this money, the guys that you're asking that have proven that they can limit these guys and in some cases stop these guys, those guys are going to get their money too. There's just a contract cycle that has to happen at some point.
Yeah,
here, right?
It's over in East Rutherford, New Jersey is where it is with Sauce Gardner. That's when this whole game is going to change. But it was interesting. Look at Antoine Winfield Jr., right? The contract that he got, because now we're not even just talking about perimeter shutdown cornerbacks on the side. We're talking about nickel guys. We're talking about guys that are more in the versatile mode.
Yeah.
They're getting paid now. And I think that's the way the NFL is going to look at it more. It's where these guys are making their impact and how that affects the overall construct of the defense. The Tampa Bay Buccaneers need Winfield in order to be the defense that they want to be there. Yeah. And same thing's going to go for Sauce Gardner whenever his time finally comes. But I think the one area that's going to be very interesting to track now is, because the question was brought up in my inbox, and maybe that's why it's coming up in yours now a little bit, is like, where do you go light? Where do you not spend a bunch of money?
Yeah.
And honestly, it's getting more and more difficult to put tabs on that, because somebody had asked me the question about, well, inside linebacker, that could conceivably be a spot where you go light on. Well, dude, you and I, we covered the Packers for 10 years. How many times did we hear about, okay, well, they just don't have enough inside linebackers. Where's the athleticism? Where's the speed, the sideline to sideline? Why don't we have a Levante David?
Yeah. And in this day and age, there are, because of so much nickel, there are fewer off the ball linebackers on the field. But those off-the-ball linebackers are required to do a lot more things.
Quality.
You've got to be able to have not only the sideline to sideline, but the pass coverage and the blitzing ability and all of this kind of stuff needs to be in that one package. And when you talk about where do you allocate your cap resources, just when you think things are cranking back and there's all the stories about what's going on at the running back position, the San Francisco 49ers give Christian McCaffrey an extension at $19 million a year for 2 more years. Now, that $19 million looks paltry compared to the $35 million that Justin Jefferson is getting. But again, every team, that's where, to me, when I look at the salary cap and the allocation and stuff like that, there isn't a tried and true formula or everybody would follow it. It's making the decisions based on the personnel that you have. And yes, I mean, I think $35 million a year for a wide receiver just sounds kind of crazy. But as and I follow Kevin Seifert, who we've known for a lot of years at ESPN, and he covered the Vikings before that in the Minneapolis market. Now he's been covering the Vikings for a long time for ESPN. The Vikings didn't just sign Justin Jefferson to that kind of money because he's the best receiver in the game right now. They signed him to that kind of money because he has a chance to maybe be the best receiver who's ever played.
Yeah.
That's why they made that investment. This is a guy that is being viewed as somebody who might be able to challenge the numbers that Jerry Rice put up back in his day. That's they're betting on it. Obviously, there's no guarantee. You don't know what's going to happen. but that's the trajectory he's on.
Yeah.
So they're not going to let that type of Hall of Fame talent walk out the door. So they've made that decision, but it doesn't mean that everybody out there needs to pay their number one wide receiver $30 million a year. Every team is going to make their decisions and allocate their money based on the personnel they have and the personnel they feel they can find, whether it be in free agency or the draft.
And also the dirty little secret is with the Vikings is they have major questions at quarterback. And one, if J.J. McCarthy ends up being the truth, or even if Sam Darnold ends up playing pretty well, Justin Jefferson's going to look pretty good.
Yeah.
You also don't want to put Jefferson in the position of having to break in some new quarterbacks after having so much success with Kirk Cousins and then creating that potential problem if the numbers aren't where they want to be and he's, you look at the quarterback more than the player. Be that as it may, the point I want to bring this back to, because people ask about this all the time, and I raise this point in inbox as well. The reason the Packers were able to go so light at receiver these past few years as far as money goes is because they got really young suddenly after Devontae left. If Devontae's still there, that has a trickle-down effect on the rest of the roster. You don't know if you have Aaron Jones, if Devontae Adams is getting 25 a year, whatever it ended up being. You don't know how all that's going to shuffle out. Same thing for San Francisco. They have a little bit more breathing room here before they got to make a decision on Brock Purdy to take care of him.
Exactly.
You go, and again, back to what you were saying earlier about the receivers. Brock Purdy can't even do a contract until after year 3. So you use the cap space that you have available to try to make this run now. It's the challenge that every team is balancing. But, Mike, it goes back to my biggest principle of all, and that is if you draft well and you take players right, there's a reason why Brian Gutekunst was talking about rookie contracts, because that's the one absolute. Nothing you can do about it. This is what you play for at least these 3 years, if not the 4.
Yeah.
If you don't get those picks right, you got to go shopping. If you don't cook well at home, you got to go to KFC. You got to go over to, a Burger King. No disrespect, Burger King. But I mean, you have to go out and get, the to-go orders. The Packers have built something special in this kitchen so far, and I'm excited to see where it goes.
Yeah, absolutely. And as we talk about contracts, at some point here, we're going to be talking about a new contract for Jordan Love, I believe. It may not happen tomorrow. It may not happen next week, but it's going to happen. I think we know that. And sometime this summer on a later show, I think we're going to get to that topic. But for now, we'll call it a wrap on this edition of Packers Unscripted. Be sure to follow all of our coverage of the team. We will have coverage of minicamp and a couple more episodes of Unscripted next week as the Packers wrap up their off-season program. For Wes, I am Mike. Thank you for tuning in, everybody, and we will see you next time.